She couldn't swim. The river was fast and cold, but she jumped anyway, because it was either drown or go back to them. They thought she'd vanish. But an old rancher pulled her out, dripping and half dead. She didn't say a word. He didn't ask. Instead, he put a rifle in her hands. And what happened next changed a whole town. The trees blurred, branches whipping past May's face. Her lungs burned. She could hear them, closer now, their calls echoing through the timber. "May, come on back, girl." The voices were rough, familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. Her legs pumped, pushing through the underbrush, each step a dull ache. She stumbled once, a root snaring her ankle, but she caught herself, scrambling back up. She knew the woods, but they knew it better, or at least they had horses. She could hear the snorts and heavy hooves behind her. A sound, a low rumble, grew louder ahead. The river. She broke through the last line of pines, the ground giving way to a sheer drop to the water below. It was wide, angry today, churned with melted snow and dark mud. The current pulled at her gaze, a powerful, swirling force. The men were close now, voices sharp at the edge of the woods. One of them laughed. She felt a sting on her arm, looked down, saw blood welling from a tear in her sleeve. A stray branch, or maybe something else. It didn't matter. She looked at the river, then back at the looming silhouettes in the trees. The choice was clear, even if her mind felt fuzzy around the edges. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, then pushed off the bank. The fall was short, a jarring plunge into icy blackness. The cold hit her like a punch, stealing her breath. She thrashed, tried to fight the current, but it was too strong, too fast. It grabbed her, tugged her under, spun her around. The light above her surface disappeared. Then, nothing. Miles downstream, where the river carved a deeper channel between two bluffs, Ward sat on his porch. He was mending a bridle, the leather stiff in his hands. The sun was getting low. He saw something dark floating in the middle of the current, too big for a log. He set the bridle down. It looked like a person, maybe, a small one. It was certainly not moving. He stood, walked down the slippery path to the water's edge. The body, if that's what it was, bumped against the rocks near his bank. It was a girl. Her hair clung to her face, dark and stringy. Her clothes were torn, waterlogged. One arm hung limp in the current, blood blooming around a gash near her elbow. Ward reached out, gripped her shoulder, and with a slow, steady pull, dragged her heavy form out of the river. She made no sound. Her eyes were closed. He draped a coarse wool blanket over her, then went back inside his small cabin. When he came out, he had a thicker coat, the one he wore for winter blizzards. He wrapped it around her shoulders, the wool absorbing some of the river's chill. She was still unresponsive. He didn't say a word, didn't know what there was to say. He simply lifted her, a surprisingly light weight, onto the back of his old roan horse. The animal whinnied softly, shifting beneath the added burden. Ward led the horse, step by careful step, away from the river, back toward his isolated ranch house. The girl slumped forward against the saddle, her breathing shallow but steady. The only sounds were the horse's hooves on the dry earth and the distant rush of the river. Ward had put her in the barn, wrapped in more blankets than anyone could need. He'd cleared a space in a corner, far from the horses, near the sweet-smelling hay. She curled up there, small and still, barely a lump under the pile of wool. He could hear her shiver even from the doorway. He left a lantern burning low. She didn't stir when he placed a tin cup of water and a piece of cold cornbread near her head. She was a silent thing, even in sleep, or maybe she wasn't truly sleeping. He left her to it. There wasn't much else he could do. The next morning, the sun barely clearing the eastern hills, Ward went to check on her. The cornbread was gone, the water cup empty. She was awake, sitting up against the hay bales, watching the stable door with wide dark eyes. They didn't blink much. He walked past her, opened the chicken coop, and started tossing feed. The chickens swarmed, a flurry of white and brown. He glanced back. She was still watching him. He emptied the scoop. Then slowly she uncurled. She stood stiff at first, then took a step, another. She walked toward the chickens. Ward paused. She knelt down, picked up a handful of grain from the bucket he'd left, and began scattering it. Her movements were careful, methodical, like she'd done this 100 times before. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to run. She just worked, like she was supposed to be there. Ward went to milk the cow. He didn't press her. Later that morning, after the chores were done and the sun was higher, Ward sat on the porch, sharpening a knife. She was near him, drawing patterns in the dust with a twig. She drew a line, then another, then a curve. He watched her. She lifted the stick, tapped it on the ground, then scratched something new. 4 letters, simple and clear, M-A-E. She looked up at him, then back down at the dust. It was the first sign she'd given of who she was. He finished with the knife, tested the edge with his thumb. It was sharp. He went inside the cabin. He came back out with a pair of old leather boots, a little scuffed but solid. They had belonged to his daughter years ago, before she'd gone east. They were still good. He set them down beside the dust where she had written her name. She looked at the boots, then at him. He didn't say anything. She reached out, ran her hand over the worn leather. Her gaze went back to his face. She gave a single, small nod. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but it was close enough to a thank you that Ward felt something loosen in his chest. She pulled them on. They fit well enough. She looked at her feet, then out at the dry landscape. The boots seemed to give her a little more solidity, a bit more ground to stand on. The dust cloud appeared first, a pale smudge against the clear morning sky. Ward saw it from his porch, sitting with his coffee. It was too big for a single rider. Soon 2 horses became visible, moving fast, stirring up more dirt. As they got closer, Ward recognized the riders. He hadn't seen them up close before, but the talk in town, the way they moved, the cut of their clothes, these were the men who came and went, always looking for something, always leaving trouble in their wake. They rode up to his gate, pulling their horses to a sudden stop. The animals snorted, restless. One of the men, a tall man with a thin moustache and eyes that darted around, leaned forward in his saddle. His voice was casual, too casual. "Morning, old man." Just passing through, he paused, letting his gaze sweep over Ward's ranch, his eyes lingering on the barn. "You seen a girl out here? Maybe got a cut on her arm, like she ran through some briars." Ward took a slow sip of his coffee. The cup was chipped at the rim. "Girl," he said. His voice was flat, without inflection. "Ain't seen no girl out here. Only thing bleeding around here is cattle, and that's only when I'm branding them." He looked at the man, then at the other rider, who was smaller, quieter, but whose hand rested too close to the revolver on his hip. "This is a ranch, mister, not a boarding house." The tall man's eyes narrowed just a fraction. He shifted, a slight movement, but Ward caught it. "Right, just asking. Heard she might have washed up somewhere. Good money for her, if she's found." The smaller man said nothing, just kept his hand near his gun, his gaze fixed on Ward. Inside the barn, May was pressed back against the rough-hewn timber wall, hidden by a stack of horse blankets. She hadn't moved since the sound of the approaching horses. Through a crack in the wood, she watched them. Their faces were etched in her memory, the lines around their mouths, the way they held themselves. They hadn't seen her. She knew that. She could feel her heart beating slow and heavy in her chest. She watched Ward, how he held himself, how he spoke. He wasn't scared. He just was. The tall man nudged his horse. "Well, you keep an eye out, old man. She's got a habit of running." He gave a short, dismissive nod, then reined his horse around. The smaller man followed, without a word. They galloped off, the dust rising again behind them, until they were just a speck on the horizon. Ward stood there for a moment, watching them go. Then he turned, walked slowly back to the cabin. He saw a shadow move in the barn doorway. May stood there, framed by the dark opening. Her face was still, unreadable. For the first time since he'd pulled her from the river, she spoke. Her voice was thin, raspy from disuse, but clear. Just one word. "They'll come back." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact. Ward was in the small shed behind the cabin, the one he used for tools and odd jobs. He had an old rifle spread out on a worn workbench, its parts gleaming dull metal in the faint light. He was running an oily rag over the barrel, cleaning out the dust and grime. He liked his tools clean. The smell of oil and gunpowder hung in the air. He heard the door creak open and turned his head. May stood there, watching him. She didn't move, just stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the rifle. It wasn't just a piece of metal to her. It was something else, a flicker of something, like she was seeing fire for the first time, or something that could bend the rules. The way she looked at it, it was almost alive. He finished with the barrel, then started on the action. He picked up a small brush, worked it into the tight spaces. He put the pieces back together, clicked the bolt into place. The sound was sharp in the quiet shed. He looked at her again. She hadn't blinked. He held the rifle out, butt first. "Here," he said. His voice was low. "Ever handled one?" She hesitated. Just for a second. Her gaze went from his face to the rifle, then back again. Her hand reached out, slowly, fingers closing around the smooth wood of the stock. Her grip was careful, almost reverent. It wasn't light, though. There was a strength in it. She didn't answer his question. She just held it, the weight of it settling in her hands. Ward took her out to the back pasture, where a few old tree stumps served as targets. He showed her how to hold it, firm against the shoulder. "Lean into it," he said. Don't fight the kick. He showed her the sights, the tiny bead at the end of the barrel, how it needed to line up with the notch. Squeeze, don't yank, he told her, demonstrating the slow, steady pressure on the trigger. He loaded a single round. She watched his every move. Then she raised the rifle. It was heavy in her hands, but she held it steady. He saw her eyes squint, saw her focus. The first shot went wild, kicking up dirt far to the left. The second was closer. She adjusted, just a tiny shift in her stance. Her movements were fluid, like she was made for this. She didn't get frustrated. She didn't get angry. She just learned. It was like she was absorbing the lesson, letting it become part of her. He kept loading single rounds for her. The shots got tighter, closer to the stumps. The sun was getting low, painting the sky in reds and oranges. He set up an old tin can on a fence post, glinting in the fading light. Last one, he said. She brought the rifle up. There was no hesitation now, no visible thought, just the movement, the aim. The shot echoed across the pasture. The tin can jumped, spun in the air, then dropped with a clatter to the ground. There was a clean hole right through its center. May lowered the rifle. She didn't smile. Her face remained still, unreadable, as it always was. She simply worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, and then, without being told, reached for another cartridge. It was like she had found something she always knew how to do, but had forgotten for a long time. Sleep didn't come easy, even on the quiet ranch. When it did, it was broken, fragmented. May would wake suddenly, her breath catching, the lingering taste of dust and cheap whiskey in her mouth. She saw it then, in the darkness of the cabin, the corners of the small room stretching into familiar shapes, a shack, dim and smelling of mildew, rope biting into her wrists, the rough wood pressing into her back, voices, slurred and loud, echoing in the confined space. She's good for it. Collateral. The sound of coins clinking, a thick hand pushing her forward. Her uncle, his face red, his eyes glazed over. He didn't look at her. He never did. Just the back of his hand when she tried to speak. She remembered the feel of the window frame, loose in the rotting wood, the scrape of her bare feet on the rocky ground, running, the cold night air against her face. She remembered thinking she was free, just for a moment, then the sound of the horses again, closer this time, and the rough grip on her arm, pulling her back, the laughter. She remembered the fire too, not a warm fire, but a bright, hungry one, the hiss of metal on skin, the pain, sharp and sudden, blossoming across her side. She didn't scream. She wouldn't. She just bit down on her lip until she tasted blood. She could still feel the raised scar, a twisted mark on her flesh, a brand, a reminder. She knew there was no help in town. She'd seen the sheriff, a big man with a slack jaw, laughing with the very men who had taken her. He didn't see anything. He never did. No court, no place for a girl like her to speak. Her words would just fall on deaf ears, or worse, be twisted back on her. They called it work, but it was nothing of the kind. It was a transaction, an old debt repaid with new misery. She was a thing to be moved, from one hand to another, until there was no one left to claim her, or until she simply broke. Ward saw the way she carried herself, sometimes, a certain stillness, a sudden flinch if he moved too fast. He saw the faint puckered skin on her arm when her sleeve rode up. He didn't ask. He didn't need the details. Some things you just knew. He wasn't a man for many words, and he certainly wasn't one for prying, but he was a man for action. He walked into town the next day, came back with a small parcel. That night, when he thought she was asleep, he placed a small, clean tin of salve on the nightstand beside her cot in the barn. A roll of fresh white bandages sat next to it. He put them there and left. When he checked in the morning, the salve was open. A thin layer spread on the scar, and the bandages were new. She still said nothing, but the slight easing of her shoulders, the way she didn't quite flinch when he walked by, told him something was understood. The spring roundup was harder than usual, a few strays having wandered far into the rough country. Ward needed every available hand, and for the first time in years he had one. May was surprisingly good on horseback. She didn't ride like someone who'd spent years in a saddle, but she moved with a quiet efficiency. Her movements were smooth. She held the reins lightly, guiding her horse with small, almost imperceptible shifts of weight. She kept her eyes on the herd, watching the cattle, anticipating their moves before they made them. She was calmer than Ward had ever seen a green hand, and completely fearless. If a cow broke from the herd, she was after it without a second thought, bringing it back into line with a low whistle and a firm nudge of her horse. They were pushing a small group through a narrow pass when a rider appeared from the other side. It was Jedediah from the Triple J Ranch, a man known more for his talk than his work. He pulled up his horse, watching May for a long moment. His eyes were small, too curious. "Well now, Ward," he called out, his voice carrying in the quiet canyon. "Didn't know you'd taken on a new hand, and a pretty young thing at that." He paused, his gaze lingering on May's back. "She ain't from around here, is she? Never seen her face before." Ward rode his horse a little closer to May, a subtle shift that put him between her and Jedediah. He kept his voice even. "She's working, Jedediah. That's all you need to know." He pushed a straggler forward with his knee. "And she works better than any hand I've had in a long time. Knows cattle." Jedediah just chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. "Is that so? Heard tell you pulled her from the river. Some folk are saying she ain't natural. That's a strange way to find a ranch hand, ain't it?" He tried to catch May's eye, but she kept her focus on the cattle, as if he wasn't even there. Ward gave him a flat look. "Mind your own business, Jedediah." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words were enough. Jedediah shrugged, then turned his horse, riding off in the direction of town, a satisfied smirk on his face. He would have a story to tell now, and he did. The gossip started in town faster than a wildfire in dry grass. A young girl, found half drowned, now living at Ward's place, carrying a rifle. Whispers in the general store. Heads turning when Ward rode in for supplies. That old recluse suddenly got a girl living with him. A woman at the dry goods store said it loudest, her voice low but sharp. "She's got wild eyes, that one, and I heard she's got a gun on her hip most times. Strange things always follow strange girls. Bad luck, that's what it is." The words drifted through the small community, leaving a trail of suspicion and unease. The night was hot, heavy with the promise of rain that never quite came. Ward was sleeping lightly, as old ranchers often did, one ear always open to the sounds of the night. He heard a soft sound, a rustle at his bedroom door. He opened his eyes. May stood there, a shadow in the doorway, framed by the faint moonlight from the window. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, completely still. He pushed himself up, rubbing his eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Her voice was barely a whisper, thin and clear in the quiet room. "Wind's wrong." Ward frowned. He listened. The air was still, heavy, too still, maybe. He usually heard the wind through the cracks in the cabin walls. Now there was just silence, a strange, unnatural quiet. He got out of bed, pulling on his trousers. He walked to the window, peered out into the darkness. There was no movement in the trees, no rustle of leaves, but he felt a prickle on the back of his neck. She was rarely wrong about these things. He'd learnt that quickly. She just knew. Then it hit, a blinding flash of white light, so bright it burned residual images onto his eyes. It was followed almost immediately by a deafening crack, a sound that seemed to rip the night in half. The cabin shook. A few seconds later, the smell hit them, ozone, and then the unmistakable scent of burning wood. He ran to the window again. The hay barn, 100 yards from the cabin, was a sudden raging inferno. Flames licked up the dry timber, orange against the black sky. "Horses!" Ward yelled, already grabbing his boots. May was already moving. She had beaten him to the barn, throwing open the main doors. The horses inside were whinnying, rearing up in terror, eyes wide with fear. The smoke was thick, acrid. Together, they worked. Ward grabbed the first halter, May the second. They talked in short, sharp commands, their movements practiced, despite never having done this before. "Hold him! Pull!" They led the panicked animals out, one by one, through the swirling smoke and heat, guiding them into the open pasture, away from the spreading fire. The blaze consumed the barn quickly. Sparks flew, carried by the rising heat, igniting dry patches of grass around the property. Ward grabbed buckets, throwing water from the well, fighting the smaller fires that threatened to spread to the cabin. May was right beside him, beating at the flames with a wet sack, her face grim, streaked with ash. She moved with a purpose, never wasting emotion. As the sun began to lighten the eastern sky, painting the ruined barn in stark relief, the worst of it was over. The barn was a smoking ruin, but the cabin and the livestock were safe. Ward stood, hands on his knees, breathing hard. He looked at May, standing in the grey light, covered in soot, her eyes still sharp and clear. She looked tired, but not defeated. He thought about her words. "Wind's wrong." She didn't speak often, that was true, but when she did, she was never ever wrong. It was like she heard things, saw things, that no one else could. A quiet awe settled over him. It was worse than the last time. Ward went into town a few days after the fire, needing to pick up supplies, planning for a new barn. May went with him, like she usually did now, quiet but present. The moment they stepped into the general store, the air seemed to thicken. The usual buzz of conversation dropped to a low hum, then to outright whispers. Mrs. Albright, the preacher's wife who usually stopped to chat, was at the counter. She saw May, her eyes widened, and she quickly pulled her small child behind her skirt. A clear movement of protection, of fear. No one looked at them directly, but everyone was looking. The store owner kept his gaze on the shelves, counting out nails with extra care. Ward asked for flour, his voice steady. He ignored the whispers. May stood beside him, still as a statue, her gaze sweeping over the store, taking it all in. Not angry, just observant. He heard a fragment of conversation near the fabric bolts. "That girl," a woman hissed to her neighbor. "She don't blink when you lie. Like she sees right through a person." The other woman nodded, her eyes wide. Heard she knew that barn was going to burn. Unnatural, that is. As Ward paid, a man stepped forward, blocking their way to the door. It was Silas, a farmer from the west end of the valley. His face was red, his breath smelling of sour mash. "You girl," he slurred, pointing a shaky finger at May. "My prize sow. She got sick this morning. And the calf, too. You got something to do with that, don't you? You some kind of witch, bringing bad luck to the valley?" Ward stepped forward, putting himself between Silas and May. "Silas," he said, his voice quiet, dangerous. "You best watch your tongue." Silas just laughed, a bitter, barking sound. "Everyone knows, Ward. Ever since you dragged her out of that river, things ain't been right. She's cursed, I tell you. She's got a look about her." May looked at Silas directly then. Her eyes were flat, unblinking. The man's drunken bravado seemed to falter. He stopped laughing. His finger dropped. He took a step back, stumbling slightly. May didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The quiet stare was enough. Ward didn't argue with Silas. There was no point. He just took the flour, nodded once to the store owner, and guided May out the door. The whispers followed them out, like a cold draft. That night, Ward didn't put the rifle back in the shed. He carried it into his small bedroom. He laid it on the floor beside his bed, within easy reach. He didn't know what was coming, or what the town would do next. But he knew this. The world outside his ranch had taken May once. He wouldn't let it happen again. He closed his eyes, the smooth, cool wood of the rifle stock feeling strangely comforting in the dark. The dust cloud was bigger this time, and there were more riders. Ward saw them coming from a mile off. His stomach tightened. The two men from the forest were there, the tall one with the thin mustache, and the quieter one. But now they had the sheriff with them, and two other men Ward didn't recognize, hard-faced and armed. They rode right up to his porch, their horses snorting, kicking up dirt. The sheriff dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His uniform was rumpled, but his badge glinted in the morning sun. "Ward," the sheriff said, his voice heavy, like he was delivering bad news. But his eyes were cold. "We got a problem here. This here's a writ of custody. Official, says this girl, May. She's been absconded with. Property of a Mr. Elijah Vance, her legal guardian. It's all here, signed and witnessed." He held out a piece of paper, folded neat and crisp. It looked real enough, but Ward knew it was a lie, a piece of paper cooked up to cover their dirt. The tall man from before, the one who'd called out for May in the woods, smirked. "She's ours, old man. You can't keep her." He took a step forward, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. The other men mirrored him, their hands inching toward their weapons. Ward didn't take the paper. He didn't even look at it. He just stood on his porch, his shoulders set. The rifle was in his hands, held casually, but ready. "She ain't property," he said, his voice low and steady. "She's a human being, and she ain't going anywhere with you or anyone else." The sheriff sighed, a theatrical puff of air. "Now, Ward, don't make this hard. You're an old man. You don't want trouble. Just hand her over. It's the law." "The law," Ward scoffed. "You call this the law? A piece of paper signed by men like these?" He gestured with his chin towards the two men who had chased May. "This isn't law. This is thieving." A standoff. The air hummed with it. No one moved. The sheriff's hand was on his own gun now, ready. The other men shifted their weight, their eyes narrow, calculating. The sun beat down, hot and unforgiving. Then, the barn door creaked open. May stepped out. She was wearing the boots Ward had given her, and in her hands, held with a practiced ease, was the rifle. It looked heavy, but she held it like it was an extension of her arm. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she stood beside Ward on the porch, facing the men. Her face was still, unreadable as ever. She looked at the sheriff, then at the man with the thin mustache, her gaze unwavering. She spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a blade. "I'm not property." The words hung in the air. The sheriff blinked. He looked at May, then at the rifle, then back at May. She hadn't raised the weapon. She didn't need to. Her eyes, her steady stance, the simple truth of her words, it was enough. The other men, who had been so confident, looked at each other, then back at May. They saw something in her gaze, something that made them hesitate. The tall man's smirk vanished. The quiet man's hand dropped from his pistol. The sheriff, suddenly unsure, cleared his throat. He took a small step back. The moment broke. They hadn't expected her to stand. They hadn't expected her to speak. Ward took May to a secluded part of his land, a deep hollow where the sound wouldn't carry too far. Pines grew thick on 3 sides, and a low rise blocked the view from the valley below. Here he built a hidden shooting range. Simple targets, a few old boards, rocks set on posts. They worked on it together, digging out a backstop, clearing brush. It wasn't fancy, but it was private. It was theirs. Every day the ritual began. Early morning, before the sun got too high, May would walk down to the range, her rifle already in her hand. Ward would follow, carrying a box of cartridges. She would stand at the firing line, and he would watch. She practiced for hours. Not just shooting. He showed her how to move, low and fast, how to use the cover of the land, how to set her feet for a quick shot, how to transition from a walk to a sprint with the rifle up. He taught her hand signals. A raised fist meant stop. A sweeping motion meant move forward, wide. 2 fingers up meant hold position. She learnt them quickly, her eyes tracking his hands, her body responding without hesitation. They developed a rhythm, a silent understanding. No need for words. A nod from Ward, a shift in her weight, the click of the bolt. It was a language all their own, built on trust and shared purpose. She was still, focused, disciplined. She never wasted a shot. Every movement was deliberate. One afternoon, Ward saw 2 figures coming up the long drive to the ranch. Young girls, maybe 14 or 15, dressed in simple homespun. They looked nervous, their eyes darting around. He watched them from the porch. They stopped at the barn, then looked towards the hidden range. Ward knew what they were there for. He had heard the whispers, even out here. The stories of May, the girl with the rifle, who wasn't scared. He saw a certain desperation in their eyes, a quiet hope. He didn't stop them. He watched as May, emerging from the pines, saw them too. She didn't approach them immediately. She stood for a moment, her rifle resting in the crook of her arm. Then she nodded toward the range. The 2 girls looked at each other, then back at May. They hesitated, then started walking. Slowly at first, then picking up speed. Soon the muted cracker of May's rifle was joined by 2 softer, less confident sounds. May was teaching them. Ward watched from the porch, cleaning his own rifle. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples. He heard May's low, clear voice for the first time in weeks, instructing the girls, a quiet authority in her tone. The sounds of the shots continued, a steady rhythm in the fading light. More girls would come, he thought. He knew it. The wind was changing. One evening, after the other girls had left, their lessons done for the day, May came into the cabin. Ward was sitting by the stove, nursing a cup of coffee. She pulled a worn, creased map from beneath her shirt. It was a local survey map, covered in faint pencil marks. She spread it out on the table between them, smoothing the paper with her palm. "They run a circle," she said, her voice low, almost a murmur. Her finger traced a rough looping path across the map. "Not just here. Other ranches. They trade girls." She pointed to a few small X's, under the guise of work. But it's not work. It's collateral. The word was cold, clinical. She looked at Ward. "Like I was." She pointed to the X where she had been held, then to another ranch far to the north. "They move them around, so no one can track them, so no one knows who they are." Ward's jaw tightened. He knew, or he suspected. But hearing it, seeing it laid out on the map, was different. It made the air feel colder in the small room. May's finger moved to a dotted line, a river crossing. "They'll be here next week, 3 of them, bringing another one." Her voice was flat, without emotion, but her finger pressed hard on the paper. Ward looked at the map, then at her. "We don't kill unless we have to, May," he said. His voice was steady, calm. He had lived a life where a gun was a tool, not a solution to every problem. "We stop them, we don't kill." May looked up from the map. She nodded, slowly. Her mouth was a tight line, but her eyes, usually so still and unreadable, held a flicker of something. Something hard. Something that spoke of the brand on her side, of the time in the shack. Her eyes said, "They'll come back, and next time they won't be breathing." She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. Ward saw it clear enough. For the next few days, they moved with purpose. They scouted the river crossing May had marked. It was a good spot, a narrow stretch where the banks were steep, forcing riders into a single file. Trees provided cover. They spent hours there, studying the angles, identifying choke points. Ward taught May how to use the terrain, how to funnel targets, how to flank. He showed her where to position herself, where he would be. They dug shallow depressions in the earth, just enough to provide cover. They practiced their movements, silently, over and over, until each step was ingrained. They collected rope, some old traps. It was meticulous, careful work, every detail considered. It felt less like a rescue, and more like an operation. By the time they were done, the trap was set, waiting, as patient as the river itself. They waited in the cold morning air, hidden in the thick undergrowth near the river crossing. The sun hadn't fully risen, leaving the canyon in deep shadow. Ward had his rifle, and May had hers. The only sound was the distant murmur of the river and the beating of Ward's own heart. He saw May's hands on her rifle, steady, no tremor. Then he heard them. Hooves, distant at first, then growing louder. 3 riders, just as May had predicted. They were leading a 4th horse, its head down. A young girl slumped in the saddle, hands tied. The tall man with the mustache was there, and the quiet one, a 3rd man, large and brutish, rode alongside them. They rode into the choke point, their horses bunched together as the path narrowed. "Now," Ward whispered. May moved first. A quick, fluid motion. Her rifle came up. A shot cracked through the morning air. The large man cried out, stumbled, then fell from his horse, hitting the ground hard. His leg buckled beneath him, at an unnatural angle. He screamed, a raw animal sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Ward aimed for the other 2. He didn't shoot to kill. His shot took the quiet man's horse in the flank. The animal reared, threw its rider, who landed in a heap. The tall man pulled his pistol, trying to get a bead on where the shots had come from. He was confused, looking wildly around. May fired again. This time, the shot was aimed with chilling precision. The man screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony. His hand, the one holding the pistol, flew back, blood blossoming bright red against his skin. The pistol clattered to the ground. There was a clean, round hole through the palm of his hand, right where the bullet had passed through. He gripped his ruined hand, his face pale with shock and pain. The 3rd man, the quiet one, was scrambling to his feet, disoriented. May could have shot him. Ward saw her sight picture, saw her finger tighten on the trigger. But then, she lowered the rifle, just a fraction, saw her finger tighten on the trigger. He looked up, saw his companions, one screaming on the ground, the other clutching a bleeding stump. Panic flared in his eyes. He turned, ran back towards his horse, scrambling onto its back, desperate to escape. May let him go. She watched him ride away, a dark blur disappearing into the trees. She lifted her head slightly, her voice barely a breath, but Ward knew the running man would hear it. "Tell the others, I remember." She turned then, walked over to the tall man, who was whimpering, pressing his bloody hand against his chest. May stared down at him. There was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, just a cold, empty stillness. She didn't smile, she didn't blink. Ward watched her, concern beginning to knot in his gut. She was different now. The girl he'd pulled from the river had returned something to the world, but something in her had changed too. Something hard had set itself deep inside her. Word of what happened at the river crossing spread through the valley like a brush fire, not through official channels but through whispers, through the sudden silence of men like Jedediah. The 2 who came back from the ambush, the one with the broken leg, the other with a missing hand. They told their stories, distorted by pain and fear, but the core truth remained. May was not to be trifled with, and something else, something quieter but just as potent. No girls had gone missing in 3 weeks. The dark trade circle, at least for now, seemed to have broken, but May's eyes, they had changed. Ward saw it every day. They remained hard, watchful, like a predator's. The quiet determination he'd first seen had hardened into something unyielding. She slept less, always restless, always listening. The rifle was no longer just a tool for practice. It was an extension of her, always within reach. By her cot in the barn, by the kitchen table, even when she was out feeding the chickens, it was nearby, a shadow she cast. She ate less too, her body growing leaner, more wire-tough. One evening, Ward found her sitting on the porch, cleaning her rifle, as usual. The setting sun glinted off the barrel. He pulled up a chair beside her. He didn't pick up his own rifle. He just sat, letting the silence settle between them. "May," he said, his voice soft, almost a question. "Are you all right?" She stopped cleaning, but didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the distant hills, where the last light was fading. "You gave me a weapon," she said, her voice flat, devoid of self-pity or anger. "It was just a statement, a fact. I became one." She ran her thumb over the cold steel of the rifle. Ward looked at her, then back at the hills. He thought about what she'd been through, what she'd become. The world had forced her hand. He had just given her the means to fight back. He watched her for a long moment. He didn't know what to say. There wasn't a right answer for that kind of truth. The first sob was quiet, a tiny catch in her throat. She didn't make a sound at first, just a small, shaky intake of breath. Then another. Her shoulders began to tremble, just slightly. The rifle slipped from her grasp, thudding softly onto the porch floor. She brought her hands up to her face, pressing them hard against her eyes, as if she could push the world away. Her body convulsed once, then twice, and then the quiet, broken sounds began. Not loud wails, but choked, ragged gasps, the kind that tear from deep inside. Years of silence, of holding it all in, were finally breaking free. Ward didn't move. He didn't touch her. He just sat there, beside her, in the deepening twilight. The sound of her quiet weeping filled the air, a raw private sound on the wide empty porch. He just stayed, a silent presence, letting her be, letting the tears fall. The first time she had cried since he had found her in the river. A week later, a different kind of trouble hit the valley. A boy, young, barely 7 years old, wandered off from his family's farm near the edge of the deep woods. He'd gone looking for a stray lamb. By nightfall, he hadn't returned. The town panicked. Everyone knew the woods could be unforgiving. Wolves, bears, old abandoned mines. Plenty of ways for a child to disappear. Men gathered, lanterns lit, voices urgent with fear. They organized search parties, calling out the boy's name, their shouts swallowed by the dark timber. They came to Ward's ranch, a desperate knock on his door in the middle of the night. The boy's father, frantic, explained. Ward listened. May was there, standing just inside the door, listening too. The father pleaded for any help. He didn't even look at May directly, but his eyes darted to her, a flicker of that old suspicion still there. Ward looked at May. She walked outside, a quiet shadow in the lantern light. She walked a few yards from the porch, into the dust, and knelt down. She pressed her palms flat against the dry earth, closing her eyes. She stayed like that for a long moment, completely still, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. The men watched her, their lanterns casting long, dancing shadows. Some shifted uncomfortably. Then she opened her eyes. She stood up. Her voice was calm, clear in the strained silence. "He's west," she said, pointing a finger. "About 5 miles, near the old logging trail. Look for moss." Her directions were precise. "By a broken wagon. He's alive." The men exchanged glances. Ward didn't hesitate. He mounted his horse. "Let's go," he told the search party. Some of the men still looked doubtful, but the boy's father, desperate, followed Ward. They rode west, following May's instruction, pushing through the dark woods. The air was cold, damp. They rode for what felt like hours. They found him, just as May had said, a small abandoned logging trail, mostly overgrown, a broken-down wagon, half buried in the undergrowth, and beneath it, huddled against the cold, was the boy. He was shivering, scared, but alive. A small cut on his head, but nothing serious. He cried when his father picked him up, tears mixing with relief. As they rode back into the valley, the first light of dawn painting the sky, the word spread. The boy was found, and it was May who had found him. A townsman, old Mr. Paterson, who had always kept his distance, rode up alongside Ward. He looked at the quiet figure of May, riding just ahead, her silhouette sharp against the rising sun. He cleared his throat. His voice was rough with emotion. "She's not cursed," he said. It wasn't a whisper now. It was loud enough for others to hear. "She's a damn miracle." Years folded into each other, like the pages of an old book. The ranch still stood, solid against the changing seasons. May still lived there, not a girl anymore,